Dan and Amy, it's Fat Tuesday.
Oh, yeah.
We got Punchkis coming.
Punchki.
Punchki. Punchki?
Punchkis.
Punchki.
Oh, I thought you were down with the struggle there.
No,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan
if
of
you
the Polish people.
Eat one, it's about 5,000 calories.
Well, that's
so,
why they call it Fat Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're living fat up here in Lake County, PHAT.
Oh, yeah, don't
Fat.
you know?
Because we're at AM Woodland Outdoor Design in Mundelein, part of our AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour 2018. And we'll be talking to the principals of this going enterprise at the bottom of the hour. But first, we have to talk a little bit of state finances. Governor Ronner gives his budget address tomorrow. And, of course, topic that has to be addressed. I don't know if it will be specifically, but it has to be addressed fundamentally, which is the largest unfunded pension liabilities in the country that Illinois sports. And there is a new study, new special report that's been done by our friends over at WirePoints, wirepoints.com, which is a independent news organization that does policy research and commentary. Ted Dabrowski, who is over there at wirepoints.com, authored this study that looks at the rise in pension benefits and gives us perhaps a better understanding of why exactly Illinois has the large unfunded pension liabilities in the country and what we need to do if we want to, number one, keep our promises to people relying on those promises, and number two, sort of rethink and restructure the pension systems going forward so we're not in this crunch that we're in now where you're tracking at one of every $4 the state has going to public sector pensions to the exclusion of other things like K through 12 education and infrastructure and so forth. More on this topic. We're pleased to be joined by Ted Dabrowski. What's your title over there at WirePoints now, Ted?
I'm president there, Dan.
Oh, wow.
How you
Very
doing,
nice.
Dan?
Oh, excuse me, Mr. President. Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
He shall be addressed so.
President Dabrowski, from your study, this is going to be something that runs counter to the narrative that's often promulgated by those who don't want to change the pension systems, that it's a situation of underfunding. If the politicians wouldn't have shortchanged the pension funds over many years and skipped payments, then we wouldn't be in this mess. Now, there's no question that payments were skipped in some cases for a decade, and that's not a good policy. That's not good public policy. But your study finds that essentially even had those pension payments not been skipped or not been shorted, we would still have the same problem.
Well, let's be clear. This report is about the state pension funds, which is different from Chicago, where there was clearly a decade of underfunding. But this is at the state level, which is played out very differently. The reason this report's important is because underfunding is the narrative that the media, the politicians, the unions, they all want to use over and over again. Not just because it sounds good, but because they want, in the end, to guilt taxpayers into thinking that they need to put in more money. If the politicians didn't put enough money in, that means the taxpayers, by definition, didn't put it in. And that's why we need to change that narrative. Our research found that it wasn't the underfunding that's the problem. We actually put a ton of money into pensions, much more than you would think. The reality is that the benefits have grown so quickly. In the last 30 years, they've grown 1,000%, whereas inflation and incomes have grown just a little over 100%. So you're talking about almost nearly 10 times the growth in benefits compared to inflation and incomes. That's the real problem. And so we've got to flip that narrative. Otherwise, we're going to be paying taxes more and more and more.
Yeah, and I don't want my tax dollars paying for someone's pensions, but there seems to be such huge pension payments out there for certain people. Is that going to stop in the future?
Well, I think we need to change the narrative because if we don't, it's always going to be the case that taxpayers were the bad guys, right? We didn't put enough money in, and anybody who lives in Illinois knows that they pay plenty of taxes. When you've got benefits growing at, it's like literally 8.5% a year, when in Calumet City incomes are growing 1.2% a year, it's dwarfing our economy. It's dwarfing people's ability to pay for it. And we've got to stop that narrative so that we stop handing out more benefits.
And it's also dwarfing any realistic expected rate of return from investments over the long term.
Yeah, but that's part of the issue, Dan. But what it is that if you look at the yearly growth rate, all they've done, the politicians, they've done things to always increase pensions. never to decrease it. And it shows up in perks. It shows up in the cost of living adjustments. It shows up in spiking. It shows up in benefits for, like, you accumulate sick leave and you get to use that as years of service. It's always in the favor of the pensioners and always at the expense of taxpayers. And the numbers bear it out. Nobody, it's amazing that the major media doesn't want to cover it because it goes counter the narrative that it's an underfunding problem. We can talk about Chicago separately, but at the state level, it's a flat-out lie that it's an underfunding problem.
Well, but we can't talk about Chicago separately anymore, not thanks to the deal that was struck last year to bail out the Chicago public school pensions, essentially putting all Illinois taxpayers on the hook for the unfunded liabilities associated with the Chicago teachers' pension as part of that deal, right?
Oh, that's absolutely true, right? It's all going to get lumped in, and it's going to be worse and worse. And if you look at the proposals out there, they're going to want to lump everything they can together so that the taxpayers get hit. But I think here's an important point. We've got to look at this growth rate. If anything had grown like this in a corporation, it would have bankrupted it already. And, think Enron, think WorldCom. You've got huge investigations. You've got changes in how things are done after those things. We don't have that kind of behavior in Illinois. They should be analyzing why this happened, how it happened. Unfortunately, the politicians that would do that, are the ones that benefit from this. So it's unexpected that they would, critique themselves. And the Attorney General should be looking at this, but it's her father who's been in position 30 years in a row and managed all this. So it's hard to figure out how we're going to actually investigate this problem.
Not to mention the Attorney General, after 15 years in office, she's in line for a pension.
Oh, absolutely. They're all in line for pensions. And so this is the problem. This is why we have to work so hard to change this rhetoric and this narrative. And at Wire Points, that's why we did that research, because we realized that we've all contributed to this false narrative at our own expense. And when we need to challenge the politicians, we need to challenge the media to actually look at this and change the narrative so that we get the right reforms, not tax hikes. Because when you hear Biss, Kennedy, and Pritzker, they're all talking tax hikes to pay for pensions.
Ugh. Well, is there ever a time where there would be court orders for our tax dollars to pay for pensions?
I'm sorry, Amy?
Would there ever be a time where there would be a court order saying taxpayers' money has to pay for pensions?
Well, we've already seen what's happened in Harvey, a place that's been horribly run. They've run out of money. And what's funny is that the court's telling them to pay pensions when they don't have the money to pay pensions. So it's a bankruptcy already playing out in a funny way, and that'll take its way through courts. But don't be surprised to see that soon in East St. Louis and in a whole bunch of other places, and eventually, the state.
And again, just a little bit of comparison, because these numbers are so astronomical. But one of the points you make is that over the last dozen years, Illinois, third highest pension benefit growth in the nation, higher than all of its peer states, 7.5% a year between 2003 and 2015. In contrast, Wisconsin's benefits grew just 3% annually. Indiana's grew 5% annually over that period. And boy, more than 2 times Wisconsin, 40% more than Indiana's. That turns out to make a big difference when you spread it over a universe this big in terms of the state's budget. You're talking about billions and billions of dollars.
Well, Dan, if we'd controlled our benefit growth to be Wisconsin's, we'd have a $40 billion problem today, not a $130 billion problem. And if we'd just grown at twice the rate of inflation, if the benefits that we handed out had grown at twice the rate of inflation since 1987, which is the period of our study, we'd have no problem. We'd be fully funded right now. So we're talking about under reasonable benefit growth, we'd have no problem. It's because we've had extreme, unsustainable pension benefit growth. That's why we're in this crisis we're in, not underfunding.
Do you see down the road, is this ever a possibility where firefighters, Chicago police officers, just the money's not there? The check bounces or the money's not deposited in their bank accounts?
Oh, I think we're so close to that. And what should scare people is the way the stock market reacted, right? If we have a major correction, a final slowdown in the economy, there's no way that the Chicago police and fire funds survive. It's just a matter of years. And do we have to go through one more tax hike to try to save it before the truth finally comes out? But we're on our way, and that's why the policy decisions matter. Tax hikes won't help. As we all know, people are leaving. and it makes our economy worse. We've got to take the tough decisions. Like, if the unions don't want to negotiate, and they should be the ones sitting down at the table, if they don't want to, we're going to be forced to freeze salaries, cut headcount, dramatically get rid of perks that prop up those pensions. And there'll be tough decisions, and at some point, checks will bounce.
Just go back to what you opened with too. It's just a math problem. This isn't about who. You say this over and over and over again. It just try to bore it into people's heads. It's difficult, but it's just a math problem. It's not who likes police or who likes firefighters and who likes teachers and who doesn't. It's silliness. Going back to what you said at the outset, pension benefits over the last 30 years grew at 6 times the rate of state general revenue growth. 6 times the rate. So you cannot make that math work. It's just as simple as that, isn't it?
Oh, it's that simple. And I think, there's two sides to the math, and this is why I'm pushing it so hard, is that, excuse me, the math on the one hand, you might say underfunded, but that's not the problem. The math is the overpromising. And in the end, when something is growing 6 times faster than tax revenue,
and the funding source,
it's going to fail.
Yeah. And so Jeannie Ives, candidate for governor, challenging Ronner, has proposed moving everybody to 401ks like some 20,000 university employees have enjoyed for a good period of time in this state. Is that one of the prescriptions that you would offer?
No, that's absolutely one of the best prescriptions. I think Jeannie's got it right. It doesn't solve the problem, but what it does is it stops adding more pension benefits to the system. We got to stop the bleed first, and I think Jeannie's right also that it would send an excellent signal to the rest of the nation that we're finally reforming our system, that we're serious about making change, and that we're going to attack this pension problem once and for all.
He is Ted Dabrowski, wirepoints.com, which is where you can find this new study he has authored on Illinois state public pensions. Ted, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made this